Today we're going to start looking at positive and negative space. Positive space is the space that is drawn. It's the stuff that's actually there, the object. Negative space is the space around or in between an object. So in this situation, the positive space is the black. That makes up the design of this Andre the Giant face that's drawn by the artist Shepard Fairey. The negative space is a space between, so anything that's white, whether that's the bottom lip here or the space in the eyes or in between the nose. As an artist, it's our goal to balance these spaces to make an intriguing image. And by using alternating color patterns or positive and negative space, we can highlight different details. So in this situation, the face is drawn with black positive space, but the negative space of the white creates the word obey. Quick example of this, just working with a circle. Say you draw a circle, and we're going to divide that in half. The top we want to be positive space, so we're going to fill that in with black. So this is going to be our positive area. This is what is there. So the space around it is the green background. So our positive space is black. Our green background is the negative space. Now on the bottom we're going to flip that so that our positive space is actually the background, and what we leave, that negative, that open space, is going to become the green. So if you do the green background as the positive space, that leaves green negative space as the bottom of that circle. So positive, negative space. Positive space, what is there? And negative space, what is the space between or around an object? So typically the color of your paper. This project, to explore positive and negative space, we're going to create a symmetrical image. And on one side we're going to have positive and negative space one way, and on the other side we're going to do the negative or the opposite version of that, kind of like a yin and yang effect. For this, I want you to choose some sort of design that you can split down the middle, and I want you to think about ways that you can rotate it so it's slightly different on each side. We're going to talk about materials in the process for this next, so stay tuned. As you work to create your symmetrical drawing using positive and negative space, you're going to need a few materials. So I'm going to guide you through what you need to make this lesson work. The first thing you're definitely going to need is a pencil. We're going to start everything in pencil, and we're going to use pencil to transfer the left half of the design to the right. So grab a pencil. I always encourage you to grab an eraser. I erase a lot. It helps me correct everything and tighten it up to make a refined drawing. For this, I'm going to ask that we continue to use one color of ink, and since we have a lot of black markers, we're going to keep this in the black and white family. So you have a variety of Sharpies, thick markers, thin markers, in between, and brush tip will help you fill in certain areas for your positive space. You are going to need that piece of tracing paper. This is 5 inches wide by 10 inches tall. That is half of your 10 by 10 square. How can you know it's your 10 by 10 square? Well, all sides are equal, and it should be slightly wider than your sketchbook. So those are the materials that you'll need: 10 by 10 piece of paper, tracing paper, eraser, assorted markers, and a pencil. So part of this drawing project is we're going to create a drawing on the left half. We're going to make it symmetrical on the right half, so it's a mirrored version of this. And we're going to do black and white positive negative space on this side and flip it onto the other side. So to do that, and to get that ready for the reverse, we need to divide this paper in half. If you don't have a ruler at home and you can't divide it at 5 inches and 5 inches, I'm going to show you a simple way using your tracing paper or your sketchbook. The tracing paper should be half of the width of your paper. So what I do is I line that long edge up, my long edge here on the outside, and my corners. What that does is that gives me a nice central line. What I'm going to do is I can lightly trace that. Now the challenge of this is that it may not be as easy to draw a straight line against the tracing paper because it's a little wavy. The tracing paper is not a very solid surface. So what you can do to create a straight edge is actually use your sketchbook. Any flat edge that has a straight surface, such as the back cardboard, can be used to draw straight lines. So for this, I'm going to line that up with where my marks were, half and half, and I'm just going to use the edge of that cardboard to draw a crisp straight edge. When you're drawing this, even though you're covering in ink, I try to keep a somewhat light touch. That way if you make any mistakes, it is easy to go back in and erase before committing to your paper. As you start your project, since we're thinking about symmetry and this flip design from right and left, what you want to think about is what you're going to draw on the left-hand side. And you want to make sure that that design touches this center line, since this is going to be the point that it flips. For me, I'd prepared this earlier, and surprise, surprise, I decided to make a skateboard. What I did was I went in and I made sure the edges of this touch my guiding center line. So what you're going to want to do is go through and sketch. I kept it pretty loose to begin with, so I can go back in and clean this up with an eraser. But I'm going to do half of my drawing. We're only going to do one half. Once you're done with that, we are actually going to lay a piece of tracing paper over top of this. So line that up. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is take a nice sharp pencil, and we're just going to trace over every line that we want to recreate. So you're going to trace over every line that you drew. The harder you press, the better this next technique's going to work. And I find that putting my fingers down, my thumb and my index finger, and spreading those out and pushing down with that helps keep my paper from sliding all over. You want to try to make sure all your lines line up. If you get off like that and you need to, you can just line it back up to what you've drawn. So I'm going to trace this and then show you how to flip it. Okay, so I've drawn the left half of my skateboard, and what I want to do now is make this symmetrical. So I want it to be the same on the opposite side. I've traced this on the tracing paper. I've made sure I've gotten every line, and I pressed very hard. So what I want to do now is I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to line up those points, and hopefully my drawing is pretty close. And there's some areas I'll need to adjust, but that's okay. So once I have that on there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw on the back side of the paper. What this is going to do is create what we call a graphite transfer. That pencil on the other side is going to push into the paper. Graphite is able to be transferred with pressure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up exactly as I like, and I'm going to pick a spot to start tracing. Usually I like to work from the top and from left to right, so I have a pattern, so I'm making sure I transfer everything. I'm going to hold that paper as close as possible to where it needs to be. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to trace over those lines. Now it is only going to transfer exactly where you press. So make sure that you are covering all your lines and tracing over top of what you want to keep. If I draw over here, nothing's going to transfer there because there's no graphite under it. So only where the graphite's underneath it. So it's very important to follow over the exact lines and follow a pattern. I use top to bottom, left to right. So I'm going to finish this up and then show you what to do once we're done. So real quick, I just want to point out something I'm doing here. I'm just kind of sketching in these wheels. I know that I'm going to fill them in, but I don't need to take my time and be meticulous because it's a large area and that takes time. I also knew that I wanted to do a black background. I want the white skateboard deck to pop against that. I'm going to leave just a little bit of a halo around this. So I'm going around and I'm tracing, basically following that outline on this so that I can make it a little bit darker. And I'm just doing this half. And then I'm going to fill in this whole area with black. But that helps me plan. That way I have that little white area so that my wheels don't run right into my background. Most borders, you either want a thin or a thick line or a solid black area or a solid white area. So I'm going to go through them whenever I do these with pencil. Since I want this line to come forward, I'm going to make this thicker using my line weight. I'm going to leave a halo around the wheels and just scribble so I know whenever I go to the ink pen I can fill that in. So I have a rough plan there. What you want to do next is you're going to start filling in the opposite side the opposite way. So if it was black in the original drawing, it's going to be white. If it was white, it's going to be black in this drawing. I would strongly suggest using a pencil for this to plan it out, because as I come to areas like this, this is white on the other side, so they're going to become black. So I'm going to need to leave halos like I was talking about, drawing little areas around so as I shade there are white gaps in between. So that's where you got to use your eye as an artist and try to plan out those little areas. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do my opposite and plan that before we start thinking about inking. So I've planned all this out because over the years I've learned that if I don't, I've made a lot of mistakes. So that's why you see me going in and adding these kind of gaps. I'm leaving just a little space around my wheels in that, just to kind of give an extra kind of silhouette and space. So I'm going to outline everything and then fill it in. I strongly suggest using pencil so that you can adjust. I scribble in some of the big areas, but some of these areas I fill in just so I can definitely see. Once you're done, I'd encourage you to grab one of your thinner markers and then start to outline. If you're working at home or on a surface that you don't want to mark up, make sure you put an extra scrap piece of paper below what you're working on. I'm just using an old sketchbook page that we've used before that has all the marks from our different lines. That will help keep the paper from bleeding through, even though this is a little thicker paper. So I'm going to use a thinner marker and I'm just going to begin to outline everything. Now I've got it outlined, and what I want to do next is start filling in those areas of positive space. Hopefully you have a solid plan and you've paid close attention to where things overlap so you don't have two black areas coming together and merging. If you do, don't be afraid to leave a little bit of a halo around it like I left here. And then you're going to go in and you're going to start filling in. Larger areas can use the chisel tip or a large marker. Probably one of your most used markers on this is just going to be the fine point. Even if you're going to use the chisel tip, I would suggest going and doing an outline, kind of creating a black halo now on the inside, just to give yourself a working area, and I'll rotate. Notice, especially as you're doing large areas, you want to keep that piece of scrap paper underneath to avoid bleeding. So I am just going through it, I'm bulking that up. The reason why is I'm basically going into the fine areas, I'm exercising a little bit more control, and then once I build that kind of border, I can work very quickly on the inside. This may be similar to how people paint rooms. They'll paint around the outside, they'll cut all the trim, and then they'll go in with a roller. So we'll go in with a smaller marker, we'll outline it, and then if you have a large area to fill in, you can use your chisel tip, which has a wider point. And I usually like to work in straight lines, kind of like stripes of black. This allows me to get a nice even coverage. You may see a little bit of streaks in that, but it should be okay. And that can make short work of something like that. So what you want to do is go through and fill in all your planned out black areas, and then we're going to talk about line weight and cleaning up your final drawing. As you wrap up, you get your kind of yin and yang balance on this drawing. Couple things to look for. If you're doing some large areas like this background, just a reminder, put a piece of scrap paper over there. You can go over your edge to make sure you get it. You're not leaving any white spots. That scrap paper will come in handy to crisp up your edges. So I'm just going to hit these down here. Another thing I want you to think about is your line weight. If we look in this area, all these lines are the same width, or the same thickness. They start to go together. If you remember from our last unit, thicker lines tend to come forward. So if I make this line of this truck here thicker than the line of this rectangle, it's going to pop forward. And that's exactly what we're going to do. One of the things you want to look at is how can you enhance your drawing before you're done. So just making some of these areas a little bit thicker will make them pop a little bit more. And hopefully that creates a little more contrast. So I'm going to go through and just kind of do those couple things. Check to make sure I've filled in all of my dark areas, those areas of positive space, and then I'm going to go through with an eraser and try to clean it up. So now that this is all dry, you can go through and start to really make it nice and presentable by removing any of those pencil lines. So I usually just go over the whole drawing to try to remove anything that I don't need, and that really helps that positive and negative contrast come back together. One thing you may want to do as you do this, you may notice that maybe some of your areas are inconsistent. You can always go back in and touch those up and smooth those out with a smaller marker just to kind of clean it up. It just makes it a little bit more presentable. But that's the challenge. Finish off, check your line weight, check your final details, and then erase any pencil lines that you do not want. Take a photograph of it, submit it on Canvas with your artist summary sheet.